Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. So glad you're here today. If you are new to the channel or interested in being part of the solution to our education crisis, I hope you will subscribe to be notified when I make new content if you're not already subscribed. Please also like and share this broadcast so others can benefit from the information we're about to share with you today. Each of these shows is an opportunity to hear from people who are working to improve education in America any way they can, and this one is no exception. Beanie Geoghegan is manager of content and solutions and co-founder of Freedom in Education. She's been a guest here before, and I'm so excited to have her back. She has been involved in education for over 2 decades as a teacher, parent, volunteer, and advocate. She's spent the last 2.5 years in a leadership position for a national parents organization, where she also created mission-driven content and worked side by side with parents in Kentucky and nationally to champion parents' rights and shine a light on the harmful content in K-12 schools. She's passionate about ensuring that all students have access to a high-quality education that shapes them into virtuous citizens and prepares them for a purposeful life. Though her 4 children are no longer in school, she is using her experience in the classroom and as a parent to continue to advocate for the next generation. Beanie is married to her high school sweetheart and spends a lot of free time letting dogs in and out of the house. She has the most gorgeous dogs you cannot believe. I invited her here today, not just because I like and admire her and think what she's doing on the ground is so admirable and something we should all emulate, by the way, hint, hint, but because she recently penned a wonderful Substack we're going to talk about called The Trouble with Trauma-Informed Education, and we will get into that. So if that is something you've been wondering about or hearing about in your school district, you're in the right place. Again, I will ask you, please like and share this broadcast. And without further ado, join me in welcoming Beanie to the broadcast. Hello, how are you today?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me back.
I'm so glad you're here. So I did read through your bio, and it is obviously, quite impressive. But I want you to share with people a little more detail about the specifics of what you're working on right now, because I think it's so great.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, well, like you said, I spent the last 2.5, almost 3 years now, exposing problems in education. And late winter, early spring last year, I sort of hit a wall where it was like, okay, we keep walking into these rooms full of parents and community members and telling them about all the problems in education, and then we're walking out and we're just leaving them flat. And so I'm a very solution oriented person. Even when my children would bring me problems, I would, listen to them and sort of stew with them for a little bit. And then I would say, okay, what can we change to fix this problem? What is the solution to this problem? And so we set out to, some of us set out we sort of looked at what were the most pressing and destructive problems facing education today, and what are some solutions that we can bring to the table for that. And we were so thrilled when we set out on that journey, because what we discovered is there are actually a lot of people and organizations who have created solutions or are in the process of creating solutions. What we found is, while they did the heavy lifting of creating those solutions, they didn't necessarily have the bandwidth to get them out in front of the people who would be adopting them in their schools or districts or implementing them in their classrooms. And so that's where we came along. And then we also have a teacher coalition as a part of our organization, where we know, the teachers are in the classroom every single day. They know best what goes on inside that classroom and the solutions that are needed to fix some of the problems. And so we want to walk alongside teachers and invite them to be a part of the solution as well. So, and of course, we have parents' rights at the center of our mission, and believe that parents first and foremost are the primary authority and custodians of their children, and they know best for their children, no matter what. So
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And what about the good books
yeah.
specifically? Yeah, what are you working on
So
there?
I don't think that anyone is surprised or will be shocked to learn that there are pornographic and sexually explicit books in our school libraries and classrooms right now, and those have been widely exposed by we did some exposing, and other organizations have exposed them. Parents have read them out loud at school board meetings, and that needs to happen. They need to be exposed and they need to be eradicated. And we certainly will continue to, work on that effort. But what we want to do, we know that there are nonprofit organizations bringing those books into the schools. We also know that there are thousands and thousands of beautiful, wholesome uh, books that will nourish children's hearts and minds. And what we want to do is fill the bookshelf so full with those books that there's not room for the other stuff. And so we're having a good book drive through the end of 2023. And our goal is to raise $25,000 so that we can send 100 books to 250 schools by the end of 2023. Well, we'll send them in 2024. And then next year, our goal will be raised to 1,000 books. So right now, we have Glisten sending their Rainbow Library book bundles. They've got about $28 million at their disposal to send. And they've already sent books to, I believe, 5,600 schools. I think that's what it is. And so we've got to counter that. And we can
Right.
counter that by exposing the books that are coming in. We can also counter that by bringing in good, wholesome books and encouraging teachers and librarians to highlight those books and put those in the hands of children. And they're not just the old books that we remember. There actually are contemporary authors and publishers and distributors that we're working with who are, currently writing and distributing good, wholesome books. So none of our books will come through Amazon or Scholastic. They'll come through the smaller distributors and publishers that we're working with. So we're really excited about it. It's, again, it's a solution. Keep exposing, keep pushing for those books to be removed, because no child should be exposed to pornography. I don't care if they're questioning their sexuality, their childhood innocence comes first, and that needs to be protected. So, but in the meantime, let's give them good, wholesome, quality books to read.
Well, it's funny you mentioned questioning. Children ask a lot of questions. It's not responsible for us to give all the answers at
Exactly.
the same time,
Yeah.
uh, especially on topics that relate directly to your maturity,
Yes.
both physically and emotionally. And I think there's some confusion around the entitlement that a child has to answers.
Right.
My goodness. I mean, I remember
Yeah.
when my younger brother, who's almost 18 years younger than I am, was asking about the birds and the bees.
Yeah.
And I asked my parents at the time, I said, "How are you?" Because I didn't remember how it was handled with me. I said, how'd you handle that?" And I remember my stepmother said, "Well, we answer exactly what he asks and not more."
Yeah.
So in other words, if he would say, "Where did I come from?" "Oh, you came from mommy and daddy,"
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
for a while that would be satisfying. And then, "Well, how did that happen?" "Well, you grew in mommy's belly." "Oh, okay." So as he kept coming back with more details and more details, they would give only the details
Yeah.
that he asked until such time as it, became apparent they had to give more of the nitty-gritty. And it seemed to follow a proper developmental path,
Right.
you know?
Well, I also
So
think that there's a misconstrued notion that schools are responsible for answering every child's question.
that too.
That's,
That too.
that is, there are times I do volunteer teach one day a week still. And there are times that my students will ask me questions and I'll say, you should ask your parents about that. It's not
Yeah,
my role or responsibility to do that. I love them and want them to have that information, but it's not my job. It's, like
that's right.
that's not my responsibility to do that. I'm not their parent. I get to spend
Yeah,
a very short amount of time with them. So yeah, so I
right.
think schools need to stop believing that they are the primary source of all information that children will ever get. It's like, no, that should actually be coming from home. And if it's not, that's a shame, but it's not necessarily the school's job to fill in the
Right.
gaps in all
Well,
areas.
that's a great point. It's also a great segue into our topic today because we're going to be talking about trauma-informed education. And we'll go over the definition of that in a moment.
Mhm.
But one of the arguments that we hear most often for it is, like, I'll personally hear it, not everyone has a mom like you,
Yeah.
Deb, or some kids grow up with these traumatic experiences,
Yeah.
which I'm sure you and I would not dispute. So you wrote an article called "The Trouble with Trauma Informed Education," and I thought it was fantastic. So we will be going through this. But for the moment, right now, what I want to do is explain, because I'm a big fan of definition of terms. so everybody knows what we're talking about, and the audience knows I'm not making things up, or I'm not saying no, in the interest of integrity, I want it to be clear that you're responding to something specific,
Yes.
advanced by educators, and you did your research just as I've done my research. And when we respond with our opinions about it, it is not political, it's not based
Right.
on some other kind of bias, it's based on us taking those definitions at face value and then taking them on at their word, and then comparing and contrasting it against real life,
Right.
what we're seeing in real life, what we're seeing as far as how is this working. So according to Edutopia, if you're not familiar with Edutopia, this is a publication that educators, universities that prepare teachers and teachers themselves will turn to and use as a reference quite frequently, and it purports to represent them as well, I would say. Um, they're saying, they say the principle of an internationally recognized trauma informed school explains what this form of education is and what it isn't. So, this is specifically by one principle.
Yeah.
Uh, ACEs, or what they call adverse childhood
Yeah.
experiences, have made their way into the mainstream over the past couple of years, even showing up on a segment of 60 Minutes. It says, however, what they're doing is they're trying to understand ACEs and the psychological, social, emotional, and academic impacts of trauma and adversity on students. Now, this sounds admirable, right? I mean, on
Yeah.
paper, you
It's
would say, well, like, if I'm a
absolutely
teacher, understanding what my student
right.
is going through might help me when
Mm,
I'm teaching them. And it
yeah.
says, however, these changes are not coming without misconceptions. Misconceptions about it. Number one, trauma informed education is solely about a student's ACE score. So if you're thinking, okay, this won't apply to my child because my child doesn't have these kinds of traumas,
Yeah.
well, now they're saying it's not just about
Yeah.
those kids. Now they're saying that increased awareness is good, but trauma informed education is not solely concerned with students' ACE score.
Right.
We should use the ACE study as a catalyst to look deeper and understand the broad scope of adversity children experiencing the study not include. So
Let me
here's your
paraphrase.
hit.
Let's assume all children come to school with trauma.
That's right. So just because you don't have a high ACE score, this would be like somebody saying, just because you're not overweight
Yeah.
doesn't mean you don't need
Yeah.
to, watch
Yeah.
every morsel of food that goes into your mouth.
Yeah.
And that's a bit overkill.
Yeah.
It's a bit of
Yeah.
overkill.
You don't have high blood pressure, but let's go ahead and put you on blood pressure medicine because,
That's right.
you could have it.
Well, actually, I can speak to that. I was put on statin drugs, even though the incident that I had, and my high blood
Yeah.
pressure, had nothing to do with
Yeah.
clots, had nothing to do with the cholesterol.
Yeah.
They took a just in case approach and throws this
Yeah.
heavy duty drug at you, and I said no. So
Yeah.
um, it does not necessarily follow that because something works well or is good for some people, we should just
Right.
give it to everyone.
Right.
Um, Chemotherapy is another good example.
Yeah.
So, trauma informed education includes examining the influence and impacts on students in our schools of factors such as racism. Okay. Explicit, implicit, and systemic. Now, here's a sunk premise and microaggressions. So,
Yeah.
for those of you who watch this channel, you know that I tend to harp on logic and reason quite a bit. It's in the title. Sorry, that's what it is. But this presupposes we all agree that every parent, that every teacher, agrees that these things are all fact-based.
Oh,
Not
I
just that
actually
they're
had a Facebook conversation, if you can call it that, with a teacher yesterday, because she said that she would write up any student in her class that did not she said that used slurs or insults, I think was what she said. I can't remember what the exact word was, toward trans students. And I said, well, I obviously would never condone insults or slurs. However, because it all started with students being forced to use the preferred pronouns. And I said, but forcing a student who doesn't believe that anybody can be, other than what they were born to be, to use a pronoun that's not correct. I mean, that would be like, that's sort of, first of all, it's a violation of their First Amendment right. And if it were my child wouldn't feel safe in your classroom. So you've got one, you're saying that it's bullying, and this child has been insulted because another student wouldn't use their preferred pronoun, which, by the way, those do change almost on a daily basis according to some students. But what I'm saying to you is that, well, my child who believes that God created male and female, and that if you're a biological boy, you go by him and his, right? But you're saying, well, no, that would be bullying, or that would be a slur, or a microaggression, or whatever. And so, yeah, there is this, like, okay, so that student who wants to go by a preferred pronoun and isn't called by that, would that be considered a microaggression? Would they be suffering trauma? Would that raise their ACE score because someone didn't use their preferred pronoun? I mean, and we have to think about these things, and how all of this on paper translates into the reality of the classroom. And when you have teachers who would say to students, you're bullying these students if you don't call them by their preferred pronoun, what student in that classroom is going to feel safe standing by their beliefs that boys are boys and girls are girls, and that's how they should. So you've got this there. It's too subjective, and yeah, you get into a lot of territory there's just no clarification on it.
Well, and all of these terms are subjective.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
and that's really the important point to to what Beanie's saying, is that when the school or even the individual teacher, so a kid could go in middle school from class A to class B, one teacher has one standard for what counts as bullying, another teacher has another standard for what counts as bullying, or what a microaggression is and what isn't, and that can be quite disorienting and confusing. They're not really learning an objective standard, and compare and contrast that perhaps with a teacher who might intervene and say to the student who has the different pronouns every day, look, it's his right to use the pronouns for himself that he wants to use, and to not be forced to speak things that are he's uncomfortable with. It is your right to not like associate with him because you
Right.
disagree. So my recommendation, and in fact, what I'm going to insist that you do to prevent conflict in the class, is simply don't associate with each other. If that bothers you and that bothers you, then you're probably not going to be friends. Please be
Right.
civil. Don't be, don't disrupt
Right.
the classroom. But we're here at school now. So
Yeah.
this is what's going to happen. And in life, the same thing is likely to happen to both of you. Not everyone's going to agree with you. Not everyone's
Right.
going to agree with you. But in this classroom, it's not about agreement. It's about, we're all here to learn. And in order for you to do that, you're going to just have to keep your boundaries and go on your merry way. There you go.
And in a reasonable world, that's what would happen. In a world where everybody almost strives to have the label of trauma attached to their name, that would
Right.
actually be this whole big situation where we'd have to have a class meeting, maybe a school-wide meeting, and talk about,
Right.
how, feelings are. I mean, the teacher actually said to me, truth is subjective. That was her statement. I screenshotted that because I'm like, well, actually, truth is objective. That's what makes it truth rather than opinion. But
That is exactly right. And that's actually quite scary.
it
If truth
was
is subjective,
terrifying.
well,
Yes.
it's
Yes.
it's also terrifying to children. Children
Yeah,
come into this world
absolutely.
knowing exactly nothing. So
Yeah.
everything they learn from the
Yeah.
adults around them. They learn from their own interaction with reality. So trial
Yeah.
and error on their own, observation on their own, like little scientists.
Yeah.
And if they are explicitly told truth is not knowable, you can't discover it, you can't
Right.
know it, then you become 100% dependent physically and emotionally on finding the group, the people to
Right.
surround yourself with who you feel can keep you safe. Your
Yeah.
agency is gone
Yeah.
unless there are things you can hold on to and know
Yeah.
for certain. Sun rises in the east, sets in the
Yeah.
west, so
Yeah.
forth. Um, that's a problem. Truth is
Yeah.
not subjective.
Yeah.
They go on to then say that another myth or misconception is educators must know a student's ACE score to successfully intervene. And there's another door open to, hey, teachers, sorry, you're invited to intervene in a child's psyche and intervene in what is and is not trauma
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
whether you know an A score or not, whether you know anything or not.
Yeah.
And it's not imperative to know a child's A score or specific traumatic experience to provide effective interventions. Why would you provide an intervention if you
Yeah.
don't know there's a specific need? How is
Well,
that going to be
also,
effective at anything?
as someone who has a teaching degree and a special ed teaching degree, I can tell you that my child psychology courses that I took while getting my teaching degree do not qualify me to um, intervene on any type of psychological um, or trauma, and needs for children. It gives me enough. Well, no, I would say no. They just don't
Well,
qualify. They just don't.
well, and I think it's very dangerous to say being trauma informed is a mindset.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
are we supposing now that minds are interchangeable? So the minds of individual
yeah,
teachers are so uniform. Remember, truth is subjective. So you have a
right,
person who thinks truth is subjective telling you that trauma informed is a mindset. That means it's their individual subjective mindset
right.
choosing to intervene in what they perceive to be evidence
Yeah,
of trauma in the way that they perceive to be the true way to deal with it. We are now have layers upon layers upon layers of subjective
yeah,
thinking acting on your children to quote foster a feeling of belonging. What
yeah.
could go wrong?
Well, and there's a teacher who I respect read this and commented that he said it's true. He said everybody's sick. Everybody has suffered trauma. The adults in the building. He said it's like adults almost compete with their level of trauma that they've experienced, and it's all about self care. So it's not just the students that are just inundated with this, but it's the adults too that they come in and act like these teachers are just the most fragile beings in the world who are about to fall apart at any moment, and maybe they are, but if they are, then is that who we want? um Providing trauma informed care to children who
Yeah.
possibly really do need it. So that's something to think about too. But that was from a teacher, and he said everybody in my building is sick. They all think that they've suffered some sort
Yeah.
of trauma, and it's
And if you're
um,
going to treat every interaction with a student as an intervention in that child's psyche,
yeah,
that makes you dangerous.
it
It,
very yes.
in fact, even licensed clinicians, responsible, ethical ones, will tell you that even when they have a client, they have a patient or
Yeah,
something sitting right in front of them, not every interaction is involving intervention.
right,
Sometimes they're listening and they're gathering information.
right,
Sometimes they're observing body language. Sometimes they're taking notes. Whatever it is, it's like if they were intervening in every interaction, they would be over treating
right.
the person. You can't know. You have to at some point, like take information in. So if you teach teachers that every interaction is an
Actually,
opportunity to
yeah,
intervene in their psychology, you could be going down the wrong
yeah,
path. If you make a mistake, my friend Barbara says all the time, you have to have the right facts to have the right feelings.
yeah.
This is such an important message that we need to be teaching our children, and we're not. And here we have adults who couldn't
Yeah,
possibly have all the facts they would need to have to even feel like they
right,
should intervene, never mind choose to do it.
yeah,
Um, so then, okay, trauma informed education is about fixing kids. This too disturbs me. If nothing else, that's if you were going to use it and you were going to use it objectively and you were going to check for A scores and you had a licensed clinician doing it, it absolutely should be about, I don't fixing is not the right word, but
no,
treating
yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah. I
Our
mean,
kids are not broken, but our systems are. So you
yeah,
can't function in this system until the system's fixed.
yeah,
How helpless are you going to feel?
yeah,
There's
yeah,
nothing you can do. This isn't your depression. You're just a depressed person. You're an
yeah.
anxious person. You're a traumatized person. You're a cancer. Like, and that when they talk about treating people who have cancer, and it's very important to tell them you are not cancer. It's this
Well, and
disease
I'll
that
tell
you
you,
have.
I told you at the get go that I'm a solution oriented person. So
Right.
if I'm going through something, or if I have an issue, or if I'm suffering from some form of depression, I actually don't want an outsider coming in and fixing me. I want someone telling me, what can I do
Right.
to live a better life,
Right.
flourish in this. And what can I do for myself? It's that sense of agency. Ian Rowe talks about this. That, I don't know if you've never read his book, it's fantastic, about giving these kids this their sense of agency. They are capable of doing things for themselves, of taking responsibility for themselves, even for their mental health. They are capable of doing that. They don't necessarily always need an intervention. Sometimes they
Right.
just need the agency, the resources to know that they can do this.
That's right. And
It's like
I just
I have kids who, some of my own children have been diagnosed with ADHD, and that's a segment for another day, I'm sure. But because I think that's overly diagnosed. But I tell them, they'll use that as an excuse sometimes for why they forget to do something. And I'm like, listen, you can give me excuses, or you can, do what you need to do. I'm like, you know that there you have this tendency to forget things, or whatever. I'm like, so what are you going to do about it? Because you're an adult now. So what are you going to
That's
do
right.
about it? So
Right.
that's, and medication isn't an option. So what are you going to do about it?
Exactly. And I just meant that, I agree with you. It shouldn't be about others coming in and fixing kids, but it should be about, if you're going to intervene, if you're going to
Right,
do
right.
something, and then talk about how effective it is. Well, how are you measuring the effectiveness if the goal isn't to treat the kids or help the kids or in some way fix what little small thing isn't working?
Deb, you've been in the education world long enough to know that measuring the effectiveness of things is not necessarily their strong
I
suit.
know, but I have to keep pointing it out to the audience because they're not in education and they need to understand that that's not okay.
We try not to measure the effectiveness of things. That's why we're getting rid of standardized tests,
I
right? We don't want to
know,
measure
but
the effectiveness of things.
I still
Yeah,
I
no,
wanna
I agree. I
reiterate
agree
it
with you. Yes.
it's a bad idea to hand our children over 8 hours a day, 9 months of the year, to people who pay no price for being wrong
Yes.
and who
Yeah.
now wanna
Yeah.
not just teach our kids things we may or may not want
Yeah.
our kids to know about,
Right. Right. But intervene
for
in their mental health. Yeah.
but that's
Yeah.
probably a dangerous place to go. I mean,
And I would say most teachers don't want to do this. They're being forced to do this. There are some who do want to play psychologist in the classroom, but I would say for the most part, most teachers are so overwhelmed with everything else that they're being asked to do that the last thing they want to do is hold group therapy sessions in their classrooms. Um, but they're, oftentimes these things are handed down from higher up, and this is what they, are told to do. So uh,
right.
to be fair to the teachers out there who don't actually want to play
No,
pseudo
of course,
psychologist.
there are lots of them.
Yes,
That
there
should be
are.
noted.
Yes.
Um, and then we have trauma-informed educators don't give students this is a supposedly misconception that they don't give students consequences for inappropriate behavior. Well, I wish that were true, but I'm sorry to report that it
I
has
have
not been my
stories.
experience. Yes, has not been my first of all,
Yeah.
this is the key word, consistent. We
Yeah.
just explained how many teachers
Yeah.
who claim to be trauma informed tell you that truth is subjective, and then we
Yeah.
have all these subjective terms. So what are the consistent consequences going to be with all these moving targets of
Right.
microaggressions and systemic this and that? So
Right.
let's move on. Sometimes you have to escalate a confrontation with a student to calm them down. This should be happening in the classroom. What? Co-regulation is the idea of keeping calm in order to calm a student who's experiencing anger, frustration, or fear. Well, guess what? We saw the video of the teacher who took away that little
Yeah.
uh Nintendo,
Yeah.
whatever it was,
Yeah.
and probably did it calmly
Yeah.
with a kid who was losing their mind,
Yeah.
and then went to take it to the office and was attacked so brutally
Her
that
life is forever changed. Yeah.
yeah, she's not gonna fully recover.
Yeah.
So a dysregulated adult cannot regulate a dysregulated child. Well, there's a giant gray area
Yeah.
between being super calm with an angry kid and being dysregulated yourself.
Um,
There's something called firm.
Right. And also, I will tell you, meanwhile, and I'll tell you this because my oldest, who was 24, saw this in first grade repeatedly, almost on a daily basis for the length of the year. So that tells you how this infected him. The child that I wrote about in my article, was carried out, so oftentimes by 3 and 4 adults. She was a very large first grader, and when she got angry, she got even bigger, and was had to be carried out by 3 or 4 adults on a very regular basis, traumatizing the
Yes.
24 other students sitting in the
Right.
classroom, and they're seeing this. So good for her. That was, calm adults came in and escorted her out, carried her. Two got her arms and two got her legs, and they would carry her out.
Right.
And my 24-year-old remembers it like it was yesterday. So, and I, in my article, I start out and I say, my children admittedly had a wonderful childhood. I intentionally, my husband and I intentionally kind of kept their childhood as innocent as we possibly could. I always said I wanted my boys to play with Matchbox cars until they were old enough to drive regular cars. And I know that that's a very sort of like Pollyanna way of going about it, but I experienced enough yuck in my childhood. I did not want any of that coming into my children's childhood. And so when they started experiencing it in their elementary school, which was a good elementary school, and my principal was phenomenal, it was like, whoa, I've protected them all this time only to, present them to it in the classroom. So it was, so yeah, okay, bring a calm adult in to de-escalate the situation. How many times does that happen before the 24 other students sitting in the classroom are watching this going, you know, this is
Well
crazy, but
well,
just
that's exactly right, and they don't necessarily see it that way, and if you take into account that their parents may or may not be that light a touch, and now you're teaching them that their parents are too harsh. They're getting
mhm,
they see what level of discipline. The one thing that I could sort of count on growing up, and I didn't have a great childhood, was that home was a softer place
mhm,
than school. And that's not to say school should be harsh, but I didn't have an expectation that I was going to school to be parented, or that I
right,
was going to school to be loved, that I was
right,
going to school to be even nurtured
right,
emotionally. I knew at a young age, and it actually served as as a great escape for me, to be honest with you, that because this was a place where I wasn't expecting those things, the fact that I wasn't getting them felt fine.
right,
Because at home I wasn't getting, it was a typical Gen X latchkey kid and, kind of
yeah,
negligent parents.
yeah,
Um, so school was where I felt like we're all expected to be upheld to the same
yeah,
standard. They're not going to be softer than I would get at home. I'm not going to, there were just certain things that I actually liked about that structure. So the irony that I find is that the more chaotic the child's life at home, it
yeah,
is my opinion, as a former teacher, as a parent, as a person who grew up with a significant amount of what they would call trauma. I mean, my ACE score probably was pretty high. Um, that doing this
mhm,
is actually adding to the child's problem, and depriving
yeah,
them of a measure of stability
right,
and discipline that they may not be getting anywhere else. And the implication that providing that is somehow harsh, or is
right,
somehow adding to their trauma, or is not trauma informed. I think it's the opposite. I think it is trauma informed. And the beauty of that approach is that the majority of students, even students without any particular trauma, are not going to be harmed. It's not iatrogenic
right,
to take a kid growing up in your household with the Matchbox cars and the two
right,
loving parents, and everything is, innocent and wonderful. It doesn't harm them to go to school and say, okay, these are the clear rules. This is what we're
right,
doing. Everybody focus. And yet it could harm them to have a sudden contrast between your loving but firm discipline, and they go to school and observe day out day in and day out a kind of tolerance
yeah.
for disruptive behavior that doesn't gel with what's going on at home.
I actually wrote another Substack about a year ago about how schools should be the halcyon in the storm. And I talked about how if we have children who experience trauma in their homes on a regular basis, which several of my students do, the one place that should provide consistent rules calm classrooms, adults who are the authority and not getting ready to get into a back and forth banter with them, or at this level of respect among their peers and stuff, like that's what schools should provide. Doing
100%.
all of this inconsistent or wishy-washy or excusing behavior, things like that. You have loud hallways, you have, oh well, the rules will make those children feel like they're somehow oppressed or feel this. No, that will make them feel safe. I mean, Chesterton talked about the fences. When you take the fences down, that's when children don't feel safe. It's those
Right.
children more than any need consistent, clear boundaries and rules. They need to know the adults are in charge at school because the adults are not in charge at home. And they need to know that. And so that's I don't know, revisit that Substack sometime and because
No,
it's like, and we're my district spends, I don't know how much on trauma informed education. And I don't know if you've been following what's been happening in Jefferson County Public Schools in Kentucky, but
uh,
the kids have consistently missed hours and hours and hours of school because we can't get bus drivers. We can't get bus drivers because kids are fighting on buses and the bus drivers aren't allowed to write them up. And it's all this whole big mess. But meanwhile, we're spending millions of dollars on trauma informed education. Well, guess what you could do for children who experience trauma? Get them to school at the same time every day. Every day. It's just so easy. Consistency. I have one child in my class who deals with a lot at home. He doesn't miss a day of school. He is there Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 3:30. He doesn't miss a day of school.
yep.
Everything going
School
on at
was
home,
my happy
school's a
place.
success. Yep, it is, and
Yeah.
it's calm. We don't talk about any of this. I don't try to be a psychologist there. I teach him how to read and write. We do history together. We do civics together. We read books. But he doesn't miss a day of school because he knows school is a good, calm, quiet, safe place with structure. He knows the schedule. He knows the routine. He knows who's going to be there every day. So that's what schools can do for trauma. Are there children who need more than that? Absolutely. And that's a very sad reality. Should that be happening in the classrooms? No. And also, there was a student who I was in when I was a substitute teacher. She was in a fifth grade classroom, and she regularly saw psychiatrists and had a therapist come to the school and that kind of thing. And she was an itty bitty thing, but she just had a lot of anger inside of her, and had spent some time in another school or learning environment, I guess, and she would just explode. She would just have these fits of rage and she would just explode. And one time I was in the classroom, I was subbing for the resource teacher. So I was in the classroom with the regular math teacher who happened to be my friend. And this little girl just exploded. I don't even know what she was asked to do, but whatever she was asked to do, she wasn't going to have any of it. She got up and punched the teacher in the stomach, just hauled off, punched her in the stomach. Well, of course, they called for the principal. Principal came down and got her, took her down to the office, talked to her for a few minutes. This was a different principal, not the one that my children had most of the time. And the little girl was back in the classroom about 10 minutes later, and they said, yeah, she needs to spend some time with her psychiatrist. So we're just going to put her back in the classroom for now. Okay. Meanwhile, there are 24 students who just saw that student punch the teacher in the stomach and come back probably with a bag of Doritos in her hand. The teacher's supposed to just go on like nothing happened. The other students are supposed to go on like nothing. And this child needed way more than what this school could provide for her. Did
That's
she
right.
need to learn? Yes, but she also needed a whole lot of other things that this particular school could not provide for her. And so that's the other thing, that not only is placing that at the center of classrooms and education, doing harm to the students who are just innocently, watching this stuff happen, but the ones who have suffered trauma, who need that type of care, really suffered trauma. I'm not talking about
Right.
the loose term that's used today. I'm talking about the kids who've really suffered trauma in their lives, who really need that care and a different learning environment. That's where they need to be. And it's not harmful and it's not hateful to put them in an environment that is structured, safe, consistent, quiet, if where they have the psychological care that they need to deal with their trauma and learn. And so I think that we have to sort of remove that whole narrative as well, that somehow removing children who've suffered trauma is a a hateful thing to do or whatever. Not necessarily. If they're
No,
feeling if they're in a safe place where they can thrive, then that's the best thing that they can
that's
do.
right. That's
And
right.
so I think we need to look at that and say, like, at what point do we, say we had a to give you an example, we had a student come to that school who did not speak very much English at all. I don't even remember where he came from. I believe he spoke fluent Spanish, but I think his first language was Spanish, but he didn't speak much English at all. And we were not an English second language school. We had no one in the building who could communicate with him. But our school was a very good school, and so his parents wanted him in our school. And it was like, okay, and he was a smart kid, but nobody could communicate with him. And so at that point, you look at it and you're like, okay, this is a good school. He's a smart kid, but we don't have the services that your child needs. Like, he needs somebody who can speak to him in his native language to be
Mm,
able to help him, gain English skills. And so he was removed. And so that's just an example of, just because it's a good school, just because it's a good learning environment, doesn't necessarily mean it's a good fit for every
that's
student.
right.
And I think that we need to really look at that now. He obviously didn't cause any harm to anybody else. My daughter actually liked having him in class, but she felt bad for him because she's like, nobody can talk to him because we can't speak his
Right.
language. So yeah,
We do that too. Unfortunately, they used to have separate ESL and then they don't anymore. I'm not really sure what the logic of that is, but
yeah,
I just think the emphasis on relationships in general, and this says here, and I'm a teacher, not a therapist. This isn't my job. This they're calling a misconception.
no,
As educators explore complexities of being trauma informed, we need to remember that trauma informed work is a journey and not a destination. It doesn't mean that teachers need to do the work of professional therapists, but you are though. So
you
that's I
are.
mean, you can't
Yeah,
say do the all the things we just read and then not call yourself a therapist because
yeah,
that's what you're doing. And then
yeah,
it says, our part in helping students with trauma is focused on relationship. That is not your job. Now,
right,
that is not to say that you would be reject any kind of interaction with your students that goes above and beyond I'm the teacher and you're the student. It's
right,
just to say that relationship building with your students is actually not your job.
right,
And you really when I was when I came out of graduate school in 1990, it was impressed upon us, our code of ethics, which apparently they've thrown out, that you explicitly do not do certain things because it muddies the waters of
right,
your the important relationship that you're supposed to maintain with the child, the boundaried relationship you're supposed to maintain,
yep,
so that you can offer the proper kind of constructive feedback, so that you can interact with the parents without stepping on their toes, so that you can receive feedback from the parents and maintain your professionalism and not
right,
lose your cool. If you're emotionally involved in any way with a student beyond that professional boundary,
right.
you will not be able to do those things. And we see it all the time, don't we? On the internet, we'll see these emotionally dysregulated teachers
Yeah.
losing their minds at the notion of a parent having even equal say in
Well,
what the student's learning.
we had an incident here in Anderson County, which is just, not far from me, where the counselor actually groomed the student, was sending her text messages,
Mm,
and, led the student to believe that she was something that she wasn't. They ended up calling Child Protective Services on the parents
that's
because the
right.
parents would not affirm. This counselor
Yep.
I mean, there's record of these text messages. I will not friend my students on social media. I don't follow
Mm-mm.
them. I don't friend them. I don't accept friend requests from them. They do not have my cell phone number. They don't. It's like, your mom has my number if she needs to reach me, or if you want to
Right,
text me on your mom's phone. You can do that. If you have a question about something that we're studying, or a field trip or something, then that's fine. But we're not friends. And I tell them that, like, they kind of like, oh, Miss Beanie, because they do call me Miss Beanie. And so it's a little bit more casual. But I'm like, I said, I'm not your friend right now. I said, 15, 20 years from now, when you're an adult and, we can be friends, but we're not friends right now. I'm your
that's
teacher
right.
and you're the student. I'm here to teach you and you're here to learn. And they know I love them and care about them, but they also know we have this school relationship, and it's very different than a personal relationship.
Exactly. And I agree. I think that's very, very important. And even when I was working with teens, and I was encouraged by my bosses at the time to reach, to go to social media and find other teens to come into our program and, look at the friends of the teens that were in the program and try to
Mhm.
follow that. I'm like, why in the world would I
Yeah,
ever do that? That is the
yeah,
creepiest
it is.
suggestion. And so but the reason I bring it up is it was presented to me by my boss like this was a perfectly fine thing to do. So I
Yeah,
think we have an entire generation of teachers and educators and people involved in education now. This isn't just brand spanking new. This has been going on. We're
yeah,
talking about somebody in their 30s who was telling me, somebody in my 50s, that this is perfectly okay to reach out directly to students. And I could not disagree more. And I'm
yeah,
bringing this up because I want parents out there to know that trauma informed education goes well beyond
yeah,
K-12. The boundaries can be in your kids' gymnastics class, or there's some other extracurricular, that this
yeah,
notion that the adults in your child's life, even if you've hand selected them as the gymnastics coach or whatever, are somehow to be trusted with the same degree of access
right.
that you have is that's happening. And if you don't want it, you're going to have to explicitly state it because the
Yeah.
expectation is reverse.
Yeah, and I mentioned that in my article about how we had certain like I guess household rules or policies that prevented them from being inadvertently harmed by other adults. And I was actually just talking to a mom. And she's got a middle school daughter, and she said, "Yeah, she wants to go, spend the night at so and so's house, but I don't know anything about so and so." And I said, "Don't you don't know what goes on in that house. You don't know who's there. You
Right.
don't know, you could be putting your child in a traumatic situation and not knowing it. Nobody thinks that they're going to be doing that when they send their child to school, but you could be doing that and not know it."
Right, right. So would you say that, the main takeaway for you when you did the research for this article was that it can be because you say here on paper, trauma informed education sounds like a compassionate way to build empathy among peers and help struggling students remain in the classroom setting. So, sounds like, I think are the key words there.
Yeah,
In reality, this often means a teacher giving the majority of her time and attention to a student who needs much more care than she can provide. Meanwhile, a room full of 25 other terrified students is looking on and missing out on learning experiences. Essentially, the other students and often the teacher experience trauma to appease the child in need of professional care. Would you say that this is kind of the main takeaway, that
yeah,
the interventions, so called,
right.
can have the inverse effect, and then on the majority of students? So
Yeah,
it
and we're talking about students, but in there I do mention teachers, right? Like not only are these students being traumatized by the things they're seeing, but these teachers are, some of them are being traumatized by what they're on the receiving end of in this. And
right,
when the one teacher, he was talking about everything's self-care, everything, people have mental health days with it. It was like, well, why are you needing a mental health day? Is it because we're trying to keep so many students in the classroom who maybe shouldn't
right,
be there? Or then you have teacher who gets punched in the stomach. Well, what is she thinking about for the rest of the day? I've been in a classroom where a chair got thrown across the room toward a teacher. What is that teacher thinking about for the rest of the day? So yes, it's like most trendy things that come across the table in the world of education. On paper, it sounds great. In reality, that's not how it plays out. And a teacher can only do so much when she is in a room in charge of 25 to 30 students, depending on the size of the classroom. And what are we asking them to do, and what, at what cost? But as I think as
right,
Thomas Sowell says, there's no solutions, there's only trade-offs. Well, here, the trade-off for keeping these children with severe trauma or psychological needs, or just unhinged behavior, is
right,
the cost is the mental health of the teachers, I suppose, and also the learning of the other students. So
right,
that's a big trade-off, in my opinion.
right. And the other thing that is interesting that's come up, we've talked about how you do have the kids, the minority of kids who do have, severe issues. But as we just read, one of the arguments is the ACE score isn't the only determinant. All the kids, like all the kids have something going on, but they're not broken, but they all have something going on. And and we've heard so many times in the last 3 years, our kids are depressed, our kids are anxious, it's off the charts, it's COVID, it's this. So we've heard that there's so much depression going on in the school, and what is now another trend on top of the trauma informed that is also leveraging trauma informed interventions is the idea that we should have mental health in the schools, or mental health focused professionals, more counselors, more social workers, and specific classroom activities, social emotional learning, et cetera, that is geared towards prevention. They'll say prevention of negative outcomes, and they'll tell us, well, this will help them academically because they won't be too sad to learn. The implication is if you're sad or depressed, you can't learn, which is false.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that it's okay to treat all the kids as if they're depressed, just like it's okay to treat all the kids as if they're
Yeah.
traumatized. We went from trauma, and
Yeah.
now we're like, nope, we also have to get the
Yeah.
depressed kids, and we're treating them
Yeah.
all like we might as well, because then they won't be depressed. And just as with the kids who are traumatized, we might accidentally be not only not helping the traumatized kids, or maybe
Yeah.
making them worse, but we might be traumatizing the kids who weren't traumatized. We now have, on the heels of your article, practically an opinion piece by a psychologist
Yes.
in California. So again, this is not,
Yeah.
some right-wing lunatic saying this is not the way to help depressed teenagers.
He
And
didn't call me and tell me he was writing this article, by the way. I didn't know.
right? And when he says, ever since the pandemic, when rates of teenage suicide, anxiety, and depression spiked, policymakers around the world have pushed to make mental health resources more broadly available to young people through programming in schools and on social media platforms. I'm sure they had no other, only the best of intentions. There's not money to be made in pushing psychoactive drugs. Anyway, moving on. This strategy is well intentioned. We agree. Yeah. Traditional therapy can be expensive and time consuming. True, but does it then follow that the government owes it to you? I don't think so. Access can be limited. By contrast, large scale light touch interventions, TikTok offerings from Harvard School of Public Health, grief coping workshops in junior high aim to reach young people where they are and at relatively low cost. But now there's reason to think that this approach is risky. You think so? Recent studies have found that several of these programs not only failed to help young people, they also made their mental health problems worse. Understanding why these efforts backfired can shed light on how society can and can't help teenagers who are suffering from depression and anxiety. And he even says, consider a social emotional skills training school program called Wise Teens. This one is awful. Led by clinical psychologists in training. It consists of 8 weekly hour-long classroom sessions in which students learn to manage their emotions with the help of tools and principles drawn from cognitive behavioral therapy and Zen Buddhism. Last month, the Behavior Research and Therapy journal, Behavior Research Therapy, published a study of 1,071 Australian teenagers who were observed from 2017 to 2018. One group participated in Wise Teens, another group participated in standard health class. Compared with these teenagers who got the standard, the students in Wise Teens reported more depression, more anxiety, more difficulty managing their emotions, and worse relationships with their parents. 1 out of every 8 Wise Teens participants appeared clinically depressed after completing the program, compared with 1 out of every 13 who did the regular health classes. Does this surprise you in any way, shape, or form?
Well, aside from bringing Zen Buddhism into a curriculum used in public school, so no, no, they cultivate a culture of chronically mentally ill people.
That's right.
That's what they've done. It's, I guess it started with COVID, but I think it started even before that, and COVID just sort of um, escalated that uh, because they could, because they had the money to, and because they had people waiting in the corridors to offer these social emotional learning uh, programs to schools. But they've cultivated a culture of chronically mentally ill individuals, and it is almost like a badge of honor to tell people that you suffer from some sort of mental illness. It's a badge of honor to say that you've suffered some sort of trauma. When you know it, I've even heard people use PTSD in a very sort of flippant kind of way, and I'm thinking, what an insult to people who have truly suffered serious trauma that wrestle with PTSD to the extent of, taking their own lives because of the things that they've seen and have experienced and things like that.
Sure.
And then to tag it on to something as simple as, well, my mom took my phone away for 6 weeks. And it's like, and we laugh about that, but that's the reality, that there are teenagers out there who consider that trauma when they're disconnected through, social media, or they've had to, you know, endure, their boss actually made them show up at work and work while they were there, that kind of thing. It's, I mean, because they have to have some reason,
Right.
for quote unquote suffering. That So this article doesn't surprise me at all. I think that the more you highlight something, the more you, um, sort of tend to build it up. The more we're in a society now that loves groupthink, right? Everybody wants to be
Yep.
a part of the group, and so we see the same thing happening with the social contagion of the trans movement. And
Right.
they want to be that belonging. There's a reason why school districts across the country are adding belonging onto the end of DEI. It's diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging now, because everybody wants to belong, even if it's belonging to a group that has suffered trauma or deals with mental health issues. And there are real mental health issues, and there
Yep.
are people who suffer real trauma, and this negates the reality of that, and it negates the seriousness of that, because
Right.
when we call every bad thing that's ever happened to you in your life trauma, then nothing is trauma, right? Like, I mean, people call everything racism now, right? Well, no, racism is a real thing, and it's a really bad thing. But when everything gets called racism, it negates the seriousness of real racism. And we can, talk about that with a lot of other things. So this
Right.
doesn't surprise me at all. I hope that people read this, and I hope that they, go to their school districts and say, okay, why are we turning our children into mental health patients rather than
Right.
turning them into flourishing human beings, where we're, equipping them with the ability to think logically and reason,
Right.
and yeah.
Well, we to your point, we've made it into a kind of social currency to have labels.
Mhm.
The intersectionality, the critical
Yeah.
theory, all of that is pushing a culture, sort of therapeutic culture, a mental
Right.
healthism. And uh, with as this points out, the prevalence inflation. So now the kids think everyone's got this. Well, who
Right.
doesn't want what everyone else has,
Right.
especially if they're getting a lot of attention for it?
Yes.
We live in a culture where attention is our biggest addiction. People want a lot of
Yes.
attention on what they're doing. And so now it also it frees you up to talk about things without stigma, but it frees you up to talk about things without stigma. So what that means is that we lose sight of when maybe we should not share every last detail of our personal lives. We valorize pain, we valorize suffering in a way that it really oughtn't be. And then you have labels that come out of that get credit on your intersectional
Right.
chart. And so as he points out, teenagers who are still developing their identities are especially prone to take psychological labels to
Yes.
heart. Instead of I am nervous about X, a teenager might say I can do X, I can't do X because I have anxiety.
Yeah.
A reframing that research shows undermines resilience by encouraging people to view everyday challenges as insurmountable. And we know that Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt have written about
Yeah.
this in Coddling the American Mind. I highly recommend you
Yes.
read it. Um, because we are literally teaching our kids, instead of that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger, we're teaching them that which doesn't kill you makes you weaker. That
Yeah.
all of these things make you you are a person with anxiety, like you are a person with trauma, not
Yeah.
you experienced some trauma in this situation and you can get past it or through it. It's not something you want to hold on to. It's not part of your identity. A diagnosis isn't an
Yeah.
identity.
Yeah.
And so instead of being progress, that we can openly talk about these diagnoses and we've removed the stigma for mental health problems. Now we're giving them excuses, not solutions. We're giving them excuses.
Right.
So I think it's very, very important uh for us to um be careful when we talk about things like trauma informed
Yeah.
and depression and mental health in school and so on. And before we started this conversation, you and I had talked about things that parents could do, things that schools could do, and I know your work is doing quite a bit. to empower teachers, to come alongside teachers who want to push back on some of the less than wonderful ideas in their own classrooms. Also, parents to do work in their own homes. And I want to talk about that. And I also wanted to bring up something you and I've talked about in the past, which is literature.
Mhm.
Because one of the questions I get is, well, okay, Deb, but kids are feeling anxious and they are feeling like the world isn't offering them the things that, maybe we felt we had all kinds of hope and dreams, whatever. And now they look around and
Yeah.
they're, whether we like it or not, social media is painting a very negative picture.
Yeah.
How can they lift themselves out? And I've suggested literature and people think I'm crazy. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah. Well, I'm a big fan of that. I don't know if you're familiar with Land of Hope, but in the beginning, John Passo's um, the excerpt that's in there, and he talks about the idiot delusion of the exceptional now and the importance of studying history so that we don't adopt that idiot delusion of the exceptional now, whether it's we're better now than we've ever been before, or things are worse now than they've ever been before. Like either way, it's wrong. Okay, that's just a false narrative. It's a false
Right.
view of now. So uh,
Right.
people have gone through much worse. People will go through much worse. People have done much greater things than what we are doing today, and people will do much greater things than what
That's
we are
right.
doing today. So, just sort of, and I think that's where literature comes into that,
Right.
is that they are able to, I know there was this big push about culturally relevant and, children being able to see themselves in the books and that kind of thing. Like, I would actually challenge that and say, people actually need to see characters who are different from them and who have experienced much worse than them and have actually been the hero of their own story, or accomplished something that they
That's
didn't think
right.
they could starting out, and understanding that what you're dealing with is hard, but it's not the hardest thing that's ever been dealt with, and you can overcome this thing as well. And maybe you will see yourself in a character. I think I was telling you about Farmer Boy. I just read for the first time over the summer.
Yeah.
Delightful book. Read it like in 2 days. So pick it up if you all haven't read it. It's a Little House on the Prairie, but it's on the little boy. So I know a lot of focus, Little House on the Prairie. People are like, "What's for the girls?" Well, it's not. But this one in particular, throughout the book, you can see the virtues of courage, perseverance, honesty, um, temperance. Just and so it's like those are the things that they can see, and it takes place in a time and place far removed from anything that I'm familiar with and that most of my
Mm.
students would be familiar with. However, it's relatable in that everybody experiences, challenges where they're going to need to dig deep and going to need to pull from those virtues. The same is true.
Right.
The favorite book of my students that I've ever read to them of anything has been The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, because they learn
Oh,
so
yeah.
much from the children in that story and the things that they experienced. And so, yeah, I definitely think, I mean, aside from, I think you and I talked about how we would just sort of disappear and escape into books when we were growing up.
Yeah.
That was a great escape for me. And I can tell you a much more nourishing escape than when I disappear into this thing, like, because I disappear into
Sure.
that sometimes too. But when you disappear into a book, into this imaginary world, it's a very different feeling. And you do so sort of forget what's going on in your own life. But you also can tap into what's happening with those characters and into that world and see that um, there's a way out. There's solutions to things, and I think literature is a great way to do that. As far as what families can do, we just recently highlighted. So one of our big pushes is for freedom and education is to restore civics. We are lacking in our civics. That again is a segment for another day. But we have a family civics trivia game, and we put up a question every day on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and we encouraged families to ask these questions sitting around the dinner table every night. It's one question, harder than you might think, because they're questions we should all know the answers to, but I bet some people didn't. and
I'm
and
sure.
so sit around the dinner table or the breakfast table. So I know there was a time in our family where I had two swimmers, and so dinner time was sometimes scattered or late or whatever, and so we would all get up and we would have breakfast together before they went off to school, and that might be where we have these conversations. most of us always had dinner together and we had time for conversations like that. I cannot emphasize enough to parents to have conversations with your children. When you are riding in the car with your children, do not let them put two earbuds in or headphones on, and just those are the best times for conversations. So
Right.
we kind of had a one AirPod rule with like, if I know you want to listen to your music, but we're going to talk too. And so it just keep those lines of communication open between your kids, not to sit and lecture them all the time, but just when you have regular conversations with them, they don't think every time you talk to them it's going to be some lecture or in-depth conversation. It's like sometimes you're just
Sure.
talking about the latest
Exactly.
episode of some dumb TV show, and that's okay because you want to just keep that open. So don't ever stop talking with your children, listening to your children, and really just being present in their lives. And you know, I know it's hard. We all are very much into our phones. I'm guilty of it as well. But put your phone down when your children come into the room and talk to you. And my students are always amazed. We have dinner every night at my house, and we don't have any screens. It's just not a thing. And my students are always amazed. They're like, "So no screens at your table, like ever?" And I was like, "Well, sometimes, like if somebody asks a question we know the answer to, maybe somebody will pick up a phone and Google, the answer or something." I said, "But no, we don't. The TV is not on. Phones aren't at the table. What do you do?" We talk. I mean, you
Ah,
just talk, and but that's
yeah.
a foreign concept to a lot of
Yeah.
families, and then they
It
don't
is.
understand why their children wander off down this horrible rabbit hole on the internet and go find people to talk to or people to listen to them on the internet who do not have their best interest in mind. So be that place where your children can come and
Yep.
talk to you, and you might not like everything that they tell you, and that's okay. Sometimes you just say okay, and then you process it
That's
and
right.
deal with it later, and that's okay. I would say don't necessarily react on your first initial emotion on things, but at least they know that they can come to you and talk to you. And I would say my house was sort of the house where everybody came, but my children always told me that their friends were afraid of me, and I was like, I don't understand why. I'm like, I'm 5'4". I'm not a big person, and they would say, well, I don't know if afraid would be the right word, but they knew that you had rules and that they had to respect your rules when they came to your house, and yet my house was the one everybody came to. So that tells you what children like. So parents, don't be afraid to set rules and consistently implement those rules,
Yep.
and implement the consequences that come from breaking those rules. So that's
Right.
what I think some parents are like, well, I don't want to push my kids away by setting too many rules. I'm like, well, I mean, if you're setting rules just for the sake of setting rules, they probably won't like it. But
Yeah.
I've always told my
Arbitrary
kids,
rules. Yeah.
right, I said, I'm setting rules for you because I want you to be the best person that you can be. I want to help you flourish and be that person, and I know that these rules will be the guardrails to help you do that. And they understood that. They didn't always like it. They did not always like it. They are now 18 to 24 today, and they thank me and my husband, for raising them the way that we did, and setting those rules and boundaries, and
Right.
not letting them, fall off the side of a cliff um,
Right.
at times.
I got some advice. I got two pieces of advice recently about parenting, in particular teenagers, and that's when they tend to be the most reserved about what they want to talk to you about. And I found them to be very helpful. First is, and this was really important for me because having grown up a latchkey kid with a single
Mhm.
dad and everything, I didn't get a lot of parenting, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
So I'm just going by, thinking what I would have wanted or what I missed out on or whatever. So, and I also tend to talk to my children as if they're the, mature kids with common sense that they
Right.
tend to be. And I forget
Right.
sometimes they're only 15, or I forget,
Right.
like the one, my last child at home. And the advice I was given was because I said, why is my daughter getting upset with me when I try to relate something that she's told me to something that I've been through and say, "Oh, I can relate because reasons." And she gets furious, like, she'll get so angry, and then I feel like, "Okay, I've done something wrong, but I don't really understand what I did wrong." And the advice I got was, "You have to understand that to her and to most teenagers, what they are going through is the most unique thing.
Yeah.
Like, no one has ever gone through this exactly the same way before, and they're not entirely wrong.
Right.
You and I cannot relate to what it's like to grow up. They've grown up with
Yeah.
technology. They've grown up with all these messages. They've grown up with all this stuff. We didn't. So whatever my experience is that I could relate, it's still going to be an order of magnitude
Right.
different. And that's not even the point. The point is they just want you to listen. They
Yeah.
don't need you to relate. They would rather you just say that sounds hard, or,
Right.
well, how do you feel about it? Like, ask, be curious. Why do you feel that way? Is there anything I can do? If there's nothing you can do, then zip it. And
Yeah.
that's especially difficult for those of us who love our kids so much. We want to do something, but there's not always something you can do.
Yeah.
And the most important thing is to listen. And the second piece of advice I got about the rule setting, especially around technology, was a friend of mine said she told her kids, look, we live in sort of a glass house world where a lot of people are out there living in a glass house. You can see everything going on inside the house. You can see everything that's going on. If you go on social media, nothing is really hidden. And that means that the people living inside those houses are not really protected. They don't have any privacy. They don't, she said, so my rules are the walls of a house that your father and I have chosen to build to keep out things that you don't necessarily, need to see, and to keep
Right.
in things that other people don't need to see. You
Right.
choose to live in a glass house or not at this point, and we've chosen not to for very good reasons. And so when you get, bristle at the rules that we give you, just think of it as that's the walls of the house that are sheltering you in a good way, like
Right.
from things that are, storms on the outside, like
Right.
you talked about the halcyon. So I think that was a really good analogy. And I
Yeah.
think if anyone's looking for one, like, how do I explain it to my kids? And just because everyone
Right.
else is choosing to live in a house with glass
Yeah.
walls doesn't mean we're going to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say, maybe most important is for parents, please don't look to the government to solve this problem for you.
No, it's not gonna happen. No, we're gonna have to do this one child at a time, because children within a
Yeah,
household are different. And we're
absolutely.
gonna have to do this one family at a time. And but I would put it in reverse order, like your family, whatever however it's constructed, whether it's a single parent, two parents, split homes, whatever it is, being on the same page as far as what the family standards are, what the family rules
Yes.
are, um, is the only trauma informed education that your child needs. And the best way probably to push back on the trauma informed educators is to have those open conversations with your
Yeah.
children. We're not likely to change the teachers or the schools
Right.
anytime soon, although I love what you're doing, coming alongside the teachers. Maybe for the last couple of minutes, you could explain to us briefly what in practice that looks like. So maybe people can, and certainly I would encourage people to visit. I'll have the link down below of Beanie's organization to just learn more. But
Sure.
um, if you could explain what that looks like.
Sure. I mean, just in talking to teachers over the last 3 years, but also, before that, I was working in the schools, and many of my friends are public school teachers. And one of the biggest complaints was the curriculum is just pitiful. It's, they're expected to teach these standards, but the curriculum is. So one thing that we're doing is promoting better standards that are content focused rather than skills focused, because you can't, again, effectively measure skills, right? But you can measure whether or not students know and understand the content. So, and we know that standards drive the curriculum. And so then we're also promoting solid curriculum. While I know teacher autonomy is a big concern, I also know that teachers would appreciate and value curriculum that doesn't require them searching the internet, at 10, 11 o'clock at night, the night before they teach a lesson. Like, here's the curriculum, here's the content you're supposed to teach. This is how I know, when I was asked to teach civics, that wasn't in my wheelhouse. I found curriculum that provided the content for me, so that, yes, I did do some of my own, background study, but that was mine. I wouldn't have had to. The curriculum we used was solid enough that I was able to, teach the students the content that they needed to know, without, coming up with anything on my own. People will say, well, that's really boring. It's like reading from a script. Well, first of all, it's not about you, it's about your students and their ability to learn. But also, it's really not boring. It's actually, I am more creative when I know what I'm teaching, right? Like, if I don't
Yes.
know what I'm,
Yes.
like, when I'm asked to teach a science lesson, I'm like, oh, this is gonna be real boring because I'm gonna not have any idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But ask me to teach a civics lesson or a lesson on a novel, it's gonna be creative, even though it's gonna be very content focused and content rich. So we're working on those things. I'm actually going to the National Social Studies Conference the first weekend in December to promote the American Birthright Standards, which is a model set of standards to restore civics in our country. Not just civics, civics, history, geography, economics are the four main areas that it focuses. So they're model standards for social studies. So I'll be there in December promoting those standards. We'll be there promoting the Land of Hope curriculum. Tuttle Twins will be joining us with their curriculum that they've got. And
Yeah.
there's a few other things that we'll have there as well. We're working on restoring science standards, which again will drive science curriculum. We've moved away from content. We've moved away from the fact that science is to be questioned, not believed. It's not a
You mean it's
religion.
not settled?
It's not settled.
What?
So we're working on that. There will be curriculum that will come alongside that. But in all of those endeavors, we are needing teachers to help us review and comment on the standards, help us draft curriculum that we can then present, or review curriculum that we're promoting as well. We have a teacher group of like a forum where they can come and talk, but we don't want it to just be a place where they come and complain. It's like, okay, here's the problem that we have, can we find a solution for that sort of thing. We want
Sure.
them to be a part of that. We do have a whistleblower place where they can anonymously, if something is happening in their school that we need to draw attention to that they don't feel comfortable doing, we do have that. We're helping them understand how and why to get out of the teachers union, because we know that that's a heavy burden on many teachers and they just don't know how to navigate their way out of that. So we're helping with that. We are asking them to be school ambassadors. So I think I talked to you earlier about how we do have some chapters, but we're leaning on school ambassadors where we want individuals to
Right.
be that bridge between our solutions and maybe one or two schools, or maybe it's 3 or 5 schools or whatever, but not necessarily having monthly meetings or anything like that, but actually bringing these solutions in front of their school board or their curriculum director or their principal, whoever it may be.
Right.
We want high schools to adopt a traditional logic elective for 11th and 12th graders. We have the curriculum. It's very inexpensive. It's very easy to implement. You do not need hours and hours of professional development to do it. We want teachers to say, I'll do that. And we want it to start next year. If we can make that happen. So we need teachers who would be willing to be a part of that. And if they aren't the ones to teach it, then we want teachers to
Right.
to take that to their principal or their curriculum director and say, can we adopt this as an elective? We'd love to have it be required someday, but for now we'll settle for elective. So every step of the way, we want teachers to be a part of that. And again, if there is something that's going on in the school that they want us to focus on and bring solutions to it, then we want to do that too. Our Good Book Drive speaks directly to teachers. We want librarians and classroom teachers who want these wholesome book bundles brought to their classrooms and libraries to contact us and say, would you add me to the list? I want to be one of the 250 schools that receives these wholesome bundles, and I will
Right.
promote them. I will put them up on a shelf and I will recommend them to students and get them out there. So we just, I know how hard teachers work. I value and appreciate the good teachers, and there are so many out there, and there are many that self-censor. There are many who say, I'm 2 years away from retirement. I'm just going to
Yep.
fly under the radar. And I'm
Yep.
thinking, you know what? Your job, your passion shouldn't be like that.
No.
You should love doing that, until you walk out till the day you walk out the door. And unfortunately, they're
Agree.
not. So there are some issues that we can't tackle because the bureaucracy of it all is very large, and we know that, but there are some issues that would help. And I think when people are part of the solutions themselves, it's encouraging, it's rewarding, it brings them hope, and lets them know that it's not just outsiders coming in trying to fix the problem. It's they
Right.
are actually being a part of that.
I think it's a fabulous idea because we are where we are And, anybody who watches this channel knows that I have these long-term hopes and dreams and, like maybe I'll just move to Argentina and I can get
There
it.
you go. They have good steak there. They have really good steak. So
That's what I hear. And now they have a president who's like,
yes,
Department of
yes.
Education gone. This is
Gone. That's
gone.
right.
Okay, it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, my
Yeah,
fantasy. But
yeah. That
but
is, I think we continue to hope for those things. We continue
yeah,
to hope that the federal government gets their tentacles out of the local
yeah,
education issues. But while we hope and while we work to make that a reality, we have
yeah.
to do the little baby steps along the
We
way.
can't
Each one
let
of
the
us,
kids we
So
can't let the kids
no,
today suffer while the adults bicker and
right,
try to figure it out, or even, as
right,
Argentina did. Are we really prepared to drag our kids to rock bottom
right,
with us? So
right.
we have to do what we have to do. We all have skin in the game, and
Right.
I think what you're doing is fantastic. I hope that people watching and listening will find ways to emulate or look
Yeah.
up your organization and see what they can
Yeah.
do locally, because
Absolutely.
that's where the solution is. And of course, if
It
you
is.
can homeschool your kids or start a co-op or start a micro school, I mean,
Right.
that's
Right.
great, especially for those people where if you live in a locality where what Beanie's doing is just not going to work, like New York City or something.
Yeah.
It might be challenging, but
Yeah.
if you don't, there are things you can possibly
Yeah.
do, but they're going to be grassroots. They're not
Yeah,
going to
do
be.
something. Yeah. Don't
Yeah,
just get on Facebook and complain. Do something. And, that's
exactly.
it's and I will tell you, I love what we're doing now. I get up excited every day to be able
Yeah,
to focus on the solutions and to be able to share them with people and to meet. The network is growing. The network of people focusing on solutions is growing every day. It's
yeah,
wonderful. It fills me with hope. It gives me encouragement, and I know that things will get better. And but yeah, people have to do something. And if all you want to do is complain, freedom and education is not for you. But if you want to get involved and be part of the solution, then
that's right.
we're here for it. And then
Awesome.
we'll show you, we'll train you, we'll and again, we're not asking anybody necessarily to start a chapter unless you want to. That's fine. But the monthly meetings where it's you come together in sort of an echo chamber are not nearly as helpful as actually going out and getting some of these solutions into schools.
Yeah, I
So
would agree. I think
yeah,
it's fantastic. Well, Beanie, thank you so much for coming to talk to us about
absolutely.
trauma-informed education and all of these topics, and I hope people will take some of these ideas and actually run with them and
Yeah,
implement them, because while we can tell you what trauma-informed education is about, we can't prevent it from being
right.
in your school. So the chances are probably like 99% that it is in your school, private as well as public, even
Yes,
parochial. And
yes,
so you as a parent, or even as a teacher, if this is something you're staring down, you need to figure out what you're gonna do about the information is now out there. It's
right.
not effective.
Right,
It's quite possibly harmful. I would say
right,
highly likely that it is. And you're taking up valuable instructional time and you're taking up the student's time, when your role should be making sure that the student is becoming competent, because then they're likely to be more confident too when they're
right.
done. So
That's
just
correct.
saying. All right. Well, thank you so much. All the information
Absolutely.
about the organizations is down below, and we'll see you
Yeah.
next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.